there's so many studies out there at the moment into things like autism spectrum disorder and certain patterns of bacteria, or something like, inflammatory bowel disease and certain patterns of bacteria. So we want to, when we're looking at it as clinicians, we want to reduce the dominant bacteria, which is creating negative symptoms like the gas, the bloating, constipation, etc. And we want to boost the bacteria, which is positive associations. So the ones that make up the gut lining, the ones that are improving digestive secretions, that are promoting vitamin K reduction in the large intestine, and all of these. And unfortunately, one of the first things you may do with working with a nutritionist or dietitian with inflammatory bowel disease is strip your diet right back to the bare bones. So you become very, very deficient. And this has a real knock-on effect when we're looking at promoting the good bacteria.
Welcome, Karen Preece Smith, to the Your Body's Way podcast. It's so lovely to chat to you finally, because we have been in contact for many, many years now. And I was just saying to you just now how, we've never spoken, we've never met, but I just feel like I know you. So just from online social media. Yeah. So it's so nice to actually speak to you, for the first time. And it's weird. I just feel like, I just feel like I know you. So a very warm welcome. How are you doing over there?
Yeah, really good, thank you. I'm sure it's not as beautiful as it is where you are, but still really nice to see you.
Oh, good. So Karen, the reason why I asked you to this podcast is because you are a fabulous nutritional therapist, and I've been following you for a very long time, and I see that you are just going from strength to strength in your business. You're continually developing, continually teaching and sharing your knowledge. And I know that you're a specialist in complex digestive systems and autoimmunity. And that is just absolutely perfect for today's topic, which is IBD, inflammatory bowel disease, which affects many people. I looked at a stat that said that in the UK, for example, 1 in 123 people suffer with either Crohn's or colitis, which is a type of IBD. So it is so common, and if someone has it, it's such an absolute bummer for them, like, to put it lightly. So first of all, can you explain how you came into nutritional therapy and how you came to be who you are and to specialize in these conditions?
Yeah, absolutely. So I had a slightly different journey to other nutritionists, in that lots of people will be interested in working in a field that they've got personal experience of. So I'm sure you've come across many people in the field who had an experience of burnout and then want to help other people avoid that, or had Crohn's disease, overcame it, and then wanted to share that knowledge. But in my case, I was actually a journalist first. So I was really into story writing, won lots of literature prizes when I was younger. And then I moved into doing a degree in journalism. I specialised in fashion and lifestyle. So I then went to do a master's in fashion history and culture, which was really fascinating. Not that lucrative as a career path, I might well say, but I then worked as a journalist for sort of 5 years. So I freelanced. I did a lot of trend analysis of the fashion industry, lots of opinion pieces. Gradually started to notice I wanted to pitch more ideas around the idea of lifestyle. And it was around the time where the clean eating was coming in as a new thing, which I know has got some not so great press around it, but it was kind of the start of people becoming really interested in food to eat to support performance and to a certain extent for their health. So around this time, I was also starting a family. So I think I was pregnant when I decided I was going to study nutrition. Had to do a year's conversion course to science, because even though I had a master's, it was in the arts. So that was really fascinating. And it was a bit of a baptism of fire. There's a lot to learn. And then I did a sort of 4-year degree in nutritional therapy at the Institute of Optimal Nutrition. So from there, I've then worked in a number of clinics. So I've worked for, I think I'm on my 4th clinic now that I've worked for, as well as building up my own business. So the benefit of working in a clinic is you see a lot of clients. So I see sort of 10 to 15 clients a week when I'm not on holiday, and it's a lot. So I've learned very quickly, it's not just about dealing with the symptoms. You know, I might see 10 clients a week that all have IBS and IBD, and we'll talk about the differences between them. But of those 10 people, they need very different things from me. Some need hand holding and just it's okay, it's not as bad as you think it is sort of approach. Other people want real detailed functional testing every 2 weeks, data driven, right? This has come down, that's gone up, let's balance things out. Some people just need an education into, the information that food does to our body and how we can modulate that. And other people are after sort of more coaching. Maybe there's an emotional aspect to their eating, or, they developed various conditions with their bowel due to a particular traumatic event or something. So all of these people are going to need a very different personalized approach. And that's what keeps it really interesting for me. And linking back to why I got into it, I like the sort of detective work. So figuring out what each client needs and then putting it in a way that they can understand. And I've worked with doctors in the past and other nutritional therapists, and those consultations are pitched very differently to an 8-year-old I might work with, or, a mum who's just learning about nutritional therapy and has read some online articles and has some understanding. So, yeah, I love my work, and it definitely keeps it interesting.
So many people think that nutrition has nothing to do with health. And to me and you, who've been studying it for so long, and this is our life, that may sound hard to believe, but there are so many people out there who still struggle to make that link. So what would you say to somebody who has IBD, who thinks, why would I need nutritional therapy? I have conventional drugs from my doctor. What would you say to someone like that?
I'd say that, so we all work alongside NHS and private doctors. Okay, so your first experience of IBD, which you gave really good statistic at the beginning, but in America, for example, it's 600 to 900,000 people that have IBD. So it's a huge amount of the population. And, you may start having, diarrhea, constipation, maybe feeling a bit off in the morning, having some digestive discomfort, a bit of acid reflux, these things that we're all told is normal. They're not actually, but we're told that they're normal. It's just IBS. So you might be fobbed off initially by your GP. And then if you go back a few months later, they may do some testing. So in the UK anyway, and I think in the US, the way that they differentiate between irritable bowel syndrome and inflammatory bowel disease is a marker called C-reactive protein or calprotectin. So that's the amount of inflammation basically in the bowel. And it would be classified as inflammatory bowel disease once it reaches over 100 or 120. Now, the important thing is it doesn't happen overnight. So if you were someone who loves the data and you keep pestering your GP and you say, I'd like an endoscopy, I'd like a stool test, please. And you do one, it comes back and you've got a calprotectin marker of 60. It's above 50, which isn't optimal. But you might say, it's okay. Maybe I've just got high inflammation. Maybe that's naturally my genetic propensity. But if you test again in 6 months and it's jumped up to 85, I'd say there's a pattern there and it's worth doing some lifestyle to bring it down, because I don't think anyone I've ever come across wants to be on long-term medication or living with a long-term chronic condition, particularly one that has you can live symptom-free if you put the work in with your lifestyle and your nutrition. You'll always sadly have Crohn's, colitis, ulcerative colitis, whatever inflammatory bowel disease we're discussing, but you won't have the symptoms of it, which is, so transformative for people's lives. We're talking people who, one gentleman I was working with recently, he hasn't dated in 5 years. He's so nervous because anytime he goes out for dinner, he's not sure what food he's going to react to. He doesn't want to be dashing to the bathroom when he's trying to impress his date. And, he's someone who is always very well turned out and very into his appearance and everything, but doesn't have that confidence to go forward with the relationship because this is so deeply personal. And it's something that, we've both got children, and we can make, there's lots of kind of like poo jokes out there, and it's a sort of a fun thing to, oh, you farted and everything. But actually, this is incredibly embarrassing if you've got someone who's in a meeting giving a presentation and they've got stomach noises going on because of a condition they've got, food they're eating, to make them feel really embarrassed, to maybe not want to go for a promotion or not want to do public speaking, and can be very limiting on people's lives.
And when you talk about how difficult it is for people who are struggling with IBD, it really hits home, because for something that me and you probably don't even think about, the people who struggle with this, it's a really tough condition to deal with. And like you said, it can be embarrassing, and it can just be so limiting in your life. So it's so important that what you've just said is that people understand that they can actually be symptom free, which is so reassuring. I'm so happy to hear that. So we've been talking about inflammatory bowel disease. We've been throwing around words like colitis, Crohn's, and you even mentioned IBS a bit. So can you dive into what inflammatory bowel disease is, and, touch on colitis, Crohn's, and how they're different from IBS?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, when it comes down to it, it's about inflammation in the body. So inflammation is another word that's kind of bandied about. So what I mean by that is, we're sat down at the moment, but if I was to slam my elbow on my desk, I'd get pain in the area. And then on a physiological level, we've got inflammatory cytokines that you might have heard about in the pandemic. So they're immune markers rushing to the area. If I've cut myself, I might have some blood clotting factor in there, starting to form a scab or bruising. All of this happens without us thinking about it. And that's natural, that's healthy, that's safe. But when we talk about chronic inflammation, we're talking about something we are doing to our body. And it's important that we take ownership of this. So something we are doing, consciously or unconsciously, which is creating that inflammatory process all the time. So let's say I'm someone who, really values my health. I spend a lot of money privately on functional testing, genetic testing, all the latest stuff that comes out. So I know that I'm someone who is sensitive, not intolerant to, but sensitive to gluten. So if someone bakes me a cake and I eat the whole cake and it's full of gluten, and then I celebrate by having a pizza that evening, I'm going to feel bad the next day. And part of that is the inflammatory process. So if you have someone who is sensitive to gluten and they don't know, and they're having Weetabix for breakfast, or some other wheat-based product, they're having a sandwich for lunch, pasta for dinner every day, over a number of years, this will add to inflammation in the body. But it's also a little bit more complex than that, because the way we deal with stress is inflammatory as well. So I could have, got this invitation for you to do a podcast, and I may have been really shy and really embarrassed and thought, oh, I don't have the knowledge to have this discussion. It will be out there for everyone to judge me. And it could have created a stress response. It wasn't. I was really excited to hear from you, and that was really positive. But we all respond to stress differently. So if we do have a busy job and we've got a busy household, and we've got, we're not fully supported by a partner or, our local community, that stress can also add to the burden. We maybe make emotional choices around food, like drinking too much, having more junk food. And this again increases that inflammatory burden. So with certain individuals, we've got the stress of our environment, the stress of our food. Maybe there's also a genetic propensity towards this. And we build up inflammatory parts of the bowel. And depending where it is, we get a different name for it. But something like ulcerative colitis, or there's different sort of medical terms depending on where it is in the bowel, if it's more to do with the rectum, if it's more to do with the pancreas. And it can be isolated or throughout pockets throughout the entire bowel. And it's that constant, like bashing your elbow against the table all day, but it's happening inside your body.
So colitis is almost like bleeding and inflammation within the bowel. How is Crohn's different then?
So Crohn's is a little bit to do with a reaction to gluten as well. I think it comes more under a slight autoimmune umbrella.
Right.
So
Would you say colitis is autoimmune as well?
it's really tricky to say.
Okay, it is, because when you look at it, it's kind of fuzzy. That they say the research suggests that it has autoimmune components to it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of fuzzy as to whether it's autoimmune or not.
It's a bit like something like diabetes, which some people are now saying type 2 diabetes also autoimmune. So we've got this movement in other disease states as well, which is important to know. But I would say, the difference with Crohn's is it can be, different pockets of the bowel. It can be slightly more autoimmune focused. There's more of a component when we're looking at sort of wheat and gluten with Crohn.
But then how is IBS slightly different? Because I know that IBD is more serious, whereas IBS is less serious, would you say?
It's serious, but I would also say you get the same symptoms. Maybe it's on a sliding scale, so they're less they less affect your quality of life potentially, and it's not chronic, so it's not something that's lifelong at the moment. Categories change, as we know, but it's the same process. It's that something you are eating or doing to your body, and it can be positive things. It could be maybe you've got histamine intolerance, and every day for lunch you have a tomato, avocado and spinach sandwich, and they're already high in histamine. That's going to send a message to your gut to then overproduce histamine. Maybe to get rid of that bloating, you then go for a 5K run after lunch, and that can also add histamine to the body. So these can be some really healthy things that we all universally know are good for us, can create that response in the body and really confuse us. So then we're thinking, what's going on? Is there any point, because I'm exercising and eating well and I'm not seeing the changes, and people give up? So that's not great, because then you're on that trajectory to potentially develop into long-term inflammation. And even if you're not concerned about developing inflammatory bowel disease, because not all of us will, not all of us have the genes that make us susceptible, but it's really not good for aging and longevity, because it's a stress on the body. So we might notice it in our skin and hair not looking as good, or our energy being a bit flat. Still important, not quite as severe as IBD.
Yeah. So you've been speaking about some causes. So, for example, you mentioned stress, you mentioned food, which is like, wow. So if anyone is struggling with IBD, they're like, well, which one is it? Like, I have no idea. I mean, we all have stress. We all have, our diet struggles from time to time for all of us. So can you go through some of the root causes? And if you were to have somebody come into your clinic and say, I have IBD, I've been diagnosed, what would be your first port of call out of those root causes? Which one would you be tempted to look at first?
So usually in the UK, when people get diagnosed, it's after an endoscopy. So that is one of those things where you get given a particular formula medicine to take. You go into hospital and you basically have a scan of your whole colon. So they scan from, as far as I'm aware, from your throat down to the anus, and they check for any pockets of inflammation. They're checking if there's any obstruction in the bowel. So if there's, by obstruction, I mean, is there some fecal matter impacted? Is there perforation in the bowel? Is there a hernia? All of these sort of things. So structurally, is your digestive system sound? They're also then looking for, when you're looking at colitis and Crohn's, you're looking for, so there's this really interesting fact with your bowel, that if you were to flatten it all out, because it's all kind of wiggles around, it will be like the size of a football pitch. And it's because it's got surface area. So not only is the bowel kind of wiggle around, but also if you look at it under a microscope, you've got these little projections called villi. And they're, again, like they increase the surface area like fourfold or something for the bowel. So what happens if we've got chronic inflammation going on, and let's say it's coming from food? So let's say you're sensitive to blueberries, but you're having them every day for breakfast, and it causes gradual wear and tear. So the villi start shortening. So suddenly you're reducing your surface area. So that means reduced surface area for digestive secretions and enzyme secretions. You're not breaking down the food as well. So even if your diet stays the same, you're not getting the same amount of nutrients from your diet. So you may start losing weight. Also, with some people, they might have blood in the stool, and that's always important to visit your doctor because it's also a sign of bowel cancer. So you want to rule that out first. But, this sort of thing can happen. So often they then come to me quite scared because they've just found out they've got chronic long-term condition. You're usually put on a variety of medications. So something that's an anti-inflammatory medication, something called a biologic, which slightly alters immune response because 70% of your immune system is within your gut. Sometimes they're put on something called amitriptyline, which is basically an antidepressant because, again, most serotonin, that happy hormone, is produced in the gut, so people can have low mood. So they're kind of on this pharmacy at this point of medications. This is a challenge for any nutritionist trying to support them because you then have to check that it's called the drug-nutrient interactions for every medication they're on and anything new you're going to put in. And if you've been told you've got a condition where food you're eating is inflaming your bowel, these people are quite nervous about trying new foods and formulas. So the first thing I would always do is try and dampen down inflammation. So I usually try and advise clients to order a stool test first, and this is a really comprehensive stool test. So we're looking for, what are the digestive markers? How many digestive enzymes are you producing? Are you producing the ones that break down fats, carbohydrates, and protein? Because let's say you're on a keto diet and you're just eating not eating carbohydrates, then you might not have the enzymes that are even breaking down fats and proteins. So it's just sitting around, increasing inflammation. So we'd look at all of that. Also look at your bacterial balance. So what's the bacteria doing? Is it supporting gut function? Is it breaking it down? Have you developed SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, because things aren't moving as quick enough through the bowel? Do you have a parasite? And we'll kind of really dig down into what's there. So we know there's inflammation. What's driving it? You're going to respond differently if there's a parasite to if it's just impaired gut function. But I'd say 90 to 95% more of my clients with inflammatory bowel disease have impaired gut function. So it means that the lining of their bowel has become perforated by whatever's causing the stress. So now it's a concern because you're increasing the likelihood of autoimmunity. You've got potentially large protein molecules floating around the body. You've got bacteria floating into the bloodstream. You might have joint pain at this point or severe stomach pain, and you really want to support that barrier. So first stage would be to put something in to support that, supplementary or via foods.
And you would decide from the stool test what that would be.
Yeah, so like with foods, we're looking at bone broth and fermented foods are really good for the gut barrier. They contain something called L-glutamine, which really helps to rebuild. But if you notice from the stool test, there's likelihood of histamine intolerance or SIBO, and you give bone broth, it contains histamine, so it's going to make the symptoms worse. So in that case, supplements would be better, something like zinc carnosine, or even a classic vitamin D, or something that's going to support that barrier.
So you just described the different elements of stool tests, which is so interesting. So you mentioned bacterial balance. Can you go into the microbiome? Because I think everybody is aware of this term now because it's so popular. Yeah. It's thank God it's becoming so much more. People are becoming so much more aware of its role and how it's actually, in a lot of cases, the root of disease. So when it comes to the microbiome, why is it important that people know about the microbiome when it comes to IBD? And therefore, they should know how to respond if they have an imbalance. So like, supporting their gut with probiotic foods and supplements and so on. What is the microbiome and why is it important that people know about it, especially if they have IBD?
So your microbiome simply is the group of bacteria that live in your gut. Okay. Now we've got good and bad bacteria, or you could call it beneficial and non-beneficial bacteria, or give it different names. But basically, it's little families of bacteria that we want to get along. We want them to co-inhabit the space. And what happens if one group, one family, one phylum gets particularly dominant, they're crowding out the other families, and it can affect gut function. So we actually have more bacteria in our gut than cells in our body. So it's a huge amount of bacteria. And even though you've got people like Dr. Tim Spector in the UK and various physicians in the US who are researching the microbiome, you've got the Zoe project in the UK, which is personalized gut testing, which I've done myself, or you've got, I think it's called the One project in the US, which is all about the gut microbiome 25-year study. We still don't really know what's going on. So we only know, they say 70%, but I think it's more like 55 lower percent. So what we're really looking at when we're looking at the detail of what we do know on a stool test is basically the group. So out of these 7 phylums, these 7 families of bacteria, which ones are most dominant? We don't want loads of one and none of the other. We want them all in similar ratios. Now, some bacteria that your listeners may have heard of, because it's quite well known in probiotics, something like lactobacillus or bifidobacterium, which you may have heard of, they take up a lot of the space. So you may have not that many of these bacteria, but they take up a lot of space, so they have a lot of health-giving properties. Something like Preece Smith bacterium, which has got the word methane in, and you think methane, cows, foul-smelling gas, not so great. That drives constipation. So if we've got a lot of that in the body, then you're going to feel quite constipated, slow down motility in the gut. It means everything's fermenting, you might not feel so great. You might notice it in your skin. And also you've then got reduced bowel movement. Some of the other bacterium, you've got Klebsiella, Enterobacter species, and these other ones associated with histamine and hydrogen, which create a lot of bloating as well in different parts of the body. So just because you've got some of these non-good bacteria doesn't mean everything is bad. If you don't have symptoms, it's not a problem. So recently, the parasite Blastocystis hominis, which for years I would get rid of with clients, has now been reclassified as a useful parasite because it reduces visceral fat in small amounts. So I've got this one myself. When I first found out about it, I was a bit, because I was like, I don't want to have this parasite. But then I consider it more like a pet for my gut bacteria, for my microbiome. And it's quite healthy. So we want to have everything in the correct ratios. And there's so many studies out there at the moment into things like autism spectrum disorder and certain patterns of bacteria, or something like, inflammatory bowel disease and certain patterns of bacteria. So we want to, when we're looking at it as clinicians, we want to reduce the dominant bacteria, which is creating negative symptoms like the gas, the bloating, constipation, etc. And we want to boost the bacteria, which is positive associations. So the ones that make up the gut lining, the ones that are improving digestive secretions, that are promoting vitamin K reduction in the large intestine, and all of these. And unfortunately, one of the first things you may do with working with a nutritionist or dietitian with inflammatory bowel disease is strip your diet right back to the bare bones. So you become very, very deficient in certain vitamins.
Even more deficient than you already are, because your bowel is already compromised.
And this has a real knock-on effect when we're looking at promoting the good bacteria. So often it's different approaches we can take, but often crowding out those negative bacteria can be more beneficial and less inflammatory in some of these clients.
When you say to crowd out the bad bacteria, so are you referring to fermented foods, probiotics? What sort of foods do you think people should be eating to crowd them out?
You're completely right. So sort of anything that's fermented. So we're looking at things like kombucha, which is a really lovely drink. It's really good if you're looking to cut back on alcohol. So it's got that slightly fizzy texture. It does contain sugar, but the sugar is burnt off in the fermentation process. So that's a good one to have. Something like kefir. So you can get coconut kefir if you're avoiding dairy, and it's a good replacement instead of yogurt of your cereal, perhaps. You've got kimchi, that's sort of spicy cabbage, which is quite nice with salads. So all these fermented foods, bone broth, which we mentioned earlier, can be a useful one. But if you are reacting to these foods, or you don't want to increase the fermentation because of certain bacteria you have in the gut, you can also look at, as we said, other things, the gut lining. So one thing that's not even a gut lining specific supplement is something like visceral manipulation can be really useful. So that's visiting a therapist who does a specific form of abdominal massage and, releases any tension within the gut, or if there's a part of your colon which is twisted, let's say, and fecal matter is building up in that area, they can release that. So there's lots we can do.
It's interesting because when you mentioned the stool test, I know that there are other tests that you can do as well, and you mentioned SIBO. So am I correct in thinking that if someone does have SIBO, then having probiotics and lots of fermented foods can make SIBO worse? Am I right in saying that? And
Yeah,
I'm just
that's
really
right.
bringing that from the recesses of my brain right now. So SIBO is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and is basically when bad bacteria is kind of overgrowing in the small intestine, which in the small intestine, there shouldn't be as much bacteria as in the large intestine.
Yeah.
But sometimes it can happen if your digestive system isn't working efficiently.
Yeah.
You can get an overgrowth of bacteria.
Like, you may have a hypothyroidism, so your thyroid isn't working as well as it could, often after pregnancy, or maybe you've got Hashimoto's disease, which again is an autoimmune version of thyroiditis. And this will really impact movement through the bowels. Everything slows down if you're unmedicated, and then SIBO can develop. So
that's right. When things slow down, that's when the bacteria has too much time in the small intestine to kind of hang out, and then it can grow and it can overgrow. And then you get a whole different bunch of symptoms. Yeah.
Kind of a symptom. You can break that down further. You've got methane, which is more the constipating one, hydrogen, which is more of the sort of gas and bloating and diarrhea, and you've got hydrogen sulfide as well, which is that very sulfur smell. And you've also got something called SIFO, which is small intestinal fungal overgrowth, which, is yeasts as well, which can really, slow things down. So there's a lot that can go wrong. And when we think about it, the way most people live their lives, not necessarily us, but or our clients, but people are busy. They're grabbing food on the go. They're sitting at their desk and grazing all day because we've been told by the media and the NHS in the UK and US for years, snacking is good. It balances blood sugar levels. And actually, the more you snack, the more you're not leaving your digestive system empty. So it's working all the time. So it's overworking, it's burning out. And we have this particular function in the body called an MMC, the migrating motor complex, which is like a little sweeper that comes in and cleans out the bowel, ready for the next meal. That only turns on when you're fasting or not eating for 4 hours. And lots of people don't go that long without eating. So, there's constantly, you've got food hanging around when you're eating your next meal. It doesn't matter if that food is a chocolate bar or if it's, some activated nuts, it's still food that has got to clear before the next meal comes in.
It's really interesting. And I love the MMC. It helps me reframe the stomach growl. Like when you get a stomach growl, that's a good thing. It means your digestive system is pushing bacteria along. I just love it. But if someone's like, hang on, what's this SIBO? So I have IBD. You're saying SIBO could be a cause. What are some of the symptoms that SIBO has that someone could be like, oh, I have that actually. Maybe I should get tested for SIBO?
Have both. And the thing that's a bit frustrating is that in a traditional stool test, and most stool tests we run are around the £400 mark. It's an expensive test. It's really comprehensive. They use something called PCR technology. So you're literally testing the genomic strains of the bacterium. And then in some of the really advanced tests, you also get a culture. So they'll grow the bacterium under lab conditions and test it with pharmaceutical agents and natural herbs and see which one is best for your individual bacteria to remove it. So it's loads of information we get from this, but unfortunately, it's just in the large bowel.
Yeah.
So what I often say is, let's start here. And if it comes back with a pattern of lots of methane bacteria, let's say, and they've also got symptoms of bloating, constipation, etc., I might say, look, let's do a breath test to confirm. So breath test, they breathe into a tube every sort of 20, 30 minutes, and it measures gas output, hydrogen and methane gas. And if it reaches a certain level, so in the UK, that's above 20 parts per million by 90 minutes for hydrogen, over 12 for methane, or over 3 if you're constipated. In the US, it's a bit different. It's 120 minutes, which is the cutoff. And there's slightly different reference ranges. And in Australia, it's different. So it's important to know where you're testing. But then we can see where it is and put a treatment plan in place. But to be honest, the treatment plan is quite similar, whether it's in the large or small intestine.
Right. So they almost wouldn't need to. I mean, I'm just kind of looking at the SIBO symptoms. So it's kind of similar to IBD.
Yeah,
so loss of appetite, abdominal pain, nausea, bloating, diarrhea, unintentional weight loss. Like it's very similar. So would you advise that someone would just, if they were getting started, to want to find the root cause, that the stool test is first, and SIBO maybe not needed in this case?
I say, yeah, completely. And it's tricky because I also freelance at a SIBO clinic in the UK. So most of my clients will have a SIBO test, to be honest. And they'll often, because it's a cheaper test, it's often one that they will repeat a lot. So I like to use it as a marker of, oh, you've had rifaximin, which is the UK drug and the US drug for SIBO. Or you've had neomycin, which is the one for hydrogen. Let's see if it worked. Okay, let's do a test. Oh, it has worked a bit. Let's follow up some herbs, okay, and go away. Because we're looking at £150 maybe to 185 for that test versus 400 for a stool test. So, you know, it's maybe a more financially viable option to start with that. And then you're ruling out one symptom, which is overall then reducing overall inflammatory loads. That can be useful too.
Yeah. I mean, these tests, they can be so expensive if you're going through all of the tests just to find the root cause. It can be a financial strain. So it's nice that you're kind of highlighting the first test that you would recommend in your experience. But are there any other tests that you would recommend? Just say someone has, you know, all the resources and they're like, right, you know, stool test, fine, you know,
right.
SIBO,
so
fine.
All the resources, the super gold platinum package.
Yeah.
They start with the stool test. So I'd get the Genova Diagnostics GIFX. There's other ones you can get, but that's my preferred one. I'd also order a SIBO test. I would do the Viva Labs one. It's competitively priced and really good. Genova and Regeneris also do some. And then we're looking at what's working for that individual client. So if there's someone who's a woman whose symptoms get worse around their period, let's say, I'd maybe do a Dutch test. So that's looking at hormone response. That's dried urine, total complete hormones. It looks at all the hormones from a urinary perspective. So what's the final products? What leaves the body? And we work upstream to see what's happening. And also, how is stress relating to this client? So I can work with loads of people who are like, oh, I'm so calm, I meditate twice a day, yeah, it doesn't bother me, and actually they're really stressed physiologically, versus the person who's very anxious and nervous, but actually it's all outward and it's coming out of the body, and stress isn't so much of a part of their picture. If they want to go further, I love nutrigenomic testing. So again, you've got 23andMe in the States and some other companies like MyDNA Health. In the UK, I work with LifeCode GX, and I would run a histamine intolerance panel to see if that client has the genes that break down histamine. If they don't, then we support them. If they do, that's great. And then you can also do an estrogen panel or a neurotransmitter panel if anxiety is a big part of the picture. Or you may want to order a metabolomics, again, by Genova. So we're looking at what are you deficient in terms of your B vitamins, your copper, your magnesium. Do you have yeast in the body? Is there mold that we can see? Is there, high anxiety? through your VMA and HVA hormones, secretions, etc. So there's so much we can do, but it's kind of like, which direction do you go in? So I always kind of push it over to the client. So if the client says, I know it's to do with my hormones, it's definitely to do with that. I noticed after I gave birth, everything got bad. I will go in that direction. If someone says, I've been backpacking around Central Asia and I had food poisoning 5 times, we'll start with a stool test. So I think it's good that the client leads this a little bit, because I'll make sure the bases are covered. Ultimately, I want them to feel in control, because they're the person that has to make the changes. They're the person living with this condition. You know, I want them to feel empowered that we're moving in the direction that they want as well.
So if somebody doesn't want to do any tests and they just like, I just want to live well and just do everything that I can without going down the test route yet. So what would you say are some major lifestyle, nutritional kind of factors that they should address just overall if they just want to get better?
I would say keep a food diary. Now, they don't need to share it with me or anyone else, but it's more to look at, you know, as I just said, as an example, maybe they're having wheat 4 or 5 times a day and they haven't noticed because it's creeping in processed food or dressings or, you know, snack bars or whatever. So you can feed it through some free software online. So there's MyFitnessPal, there's Nutritics, which you pay a small fee for. But basically, it will give you an outline of over the week. Your average protein intake is 20 grams, let's say. Your average carb intake is 100. And, you know, you're deficient in magnesium and B12. That's really useful information, because you can then type into Google foods rich in magnesium, and you can see it's kind of cocoa and, you know, dark green leafy veg, and you can add these things in. Now, it could be, I mentioned B12 being low, that you might want to follow that up with a blood test with your GP. See if your B12 is low in a blood test. You want to check MMA, really, which is B12 uptake into the cell. So if that's fine, awesome. If it's just sat in the blood with your iron, not so great. But again, you could then take a supplement. Again, you can walk into any pharmacy, pick up one off the shelf and try that yourself for a few months. Obviously better working with someone, but showing people what they can do. I'd then look at researching something like the Mediterranean diet or any other diet if you're choosing, which is very low in inflammation. So looking at your diet overall, adding in things like oily fish, so your salmon, your mackerel, anchovies, sardines, your herring, if you're not allergic, of course. Looking at increasing plant diversity, so how many colours are there on the plate? You having nice avocado if you're not reactive to that, extra virgin olive oil, all these sort of things. So you're feeling that your diet is now improving in diversity and anti-inflammatory foods. Then look up some of these superfoods. You know, we've got turmeric, which is that really lovely yellow colour. It's easy to add to roasted veg, and you could have that a couple of times a week. It contains something called curcumin, which is in most of these anti-inflammatory supplements. And you're looking at lowering inflammation. And then maybe switching your, you know, marathon training schedule for a yoga class, or, you know, if you always run alone, then maybe join a running club or something where you've got a sense of community and someone or a group of people to share this with, because it can be quite lonely, because, you know, most people don't have this. So they won't have the restrictions of, say, going out for dinner and having to check the ingredients, or not being able to stay up for the full night out because they'll get fatigued. So that's really useful to build that community, to suggest restaurants that you know can create meals that are suitable for you, and ones that have cater to your food intolerances, let's say.
So the gist I'm getting is your bowel is inflamed. So you need to do things in your life that reduce inflammation. Anything stressful to your body can increase inflammation. So, for example, like you mentioned, emotional stress, being overworked, eating the wrong kinds of foods for your body, genetics plays into it as well. Exercise is great, but maybe if you're over exercising, that can then push it over into the more inflammatory state rather than anti-inflammatory state. And so taking away inflammatory habits and increasing anti-inflammatory habits. So for example, like you said, eating omega-3 fish oils, they're really great for calming inflammation. And like you said, turmeric is really kind of famous for being anti-inflammatory. But then also like relaxing and anti-stress practices, meditation. So it's kind of your lifestyle is going from inflammatory, like to kind of calming everything down, like and really just improving your lifestyle in all aspects. And you mentioned things like mold, and you mentioned things like environment, and they really are other avenues that you can go down if you really want to get into it. But I'd say overall, like just bringing in those practices, finding out where you need some work and actually implementing it, that's where the good change, the positive changes can occur.
Yeah. And all the things we just discussed are free. You can do
Right.
you can do yoga with the free videos online.
Yes, they're everywhere. I do them often. YouTube. I'm in front of my telly and I'm just like doing the yoga classes. Brilliant.
Go for a walk with your dog, first thing in the morning if you've got one, or you can drink more water and switch out your Diet Coke for, a smoothie, let's say. So there's all these changes you can do. I'd say start there. If you notice that you're not making the progress you want, that's when you want to involve a professional to work with, someone like myself or anyone else who's specialist in this area. You really want someone who knows what they're doing, because what you don't want is to go to a very general nutritionist or dietitian and then cover what you've already doing, because it feels a waste of money. And, if you've already made these changes, you're on that good path. You just want to finesse the last bit. Your level of knowledge at this point of your condition is going to be fairly high. So you just want these final tweaks, not the bare bones, really.
Also, when it comes to diet, we talked about reducing stress and increasing like peace within the body. And when it comes to strict diets that have been shown to help with inflammatory bowel, so for example, autoimmune paleo, low FODMAP, the specialized carbohydrate diet, I think they call it, specific carbohydrate diet, SCP. There's all these diets floating around that are kind of proven to show positive results for IBD. But there is a flip side to them. Like you said, they're so restrictive. So I think autoimmune paleo takes out pretty much anything that's inflammatory. So we're talking like nightshades, which are kind of like tomatoes and various vegetables, and maybe high oxalate foods, and then maybe grains and dairy, and it strips away a lot. And even though that might be taking away inflammatory foods, it could be increasing your stress, basically. Like, what do I eat? I can't cook with food that I like. And
see me, who's on a low oxalate, low salicytate, low histamine autoimmune protocol diet. She's got about 5 foods she can eat.
Oh, poor thing.
One of the things she specifically asked for before working together was, can you support me in this diet? So I said yes, but I said my goal is that we don't stay on this diet for too long, and that you feel confident to open up foods. And because I approached it in that way and she felt confident, when we started working together, she admitted that she's got a lot of health anxiety around introducing new foods in case she reacts, and other people she worked with maybe gone a bit too fast. So we worked a completely different way with introducing one supplement a week, really slowly, one new food a week. And she's then very confident that she's not reacting to that food, and then she can move forward. And if she does react, she's got that one on a cross list that she can avoid. So it's, again, working different ways with different people. But I think that's really common. And one tip that I would say to your listeners that I often do is, if you're keeping a food diary at home and you are someone who notices that you're developing some health anxiety around this, and you're thinking, oh, I think I'm feeling ill because I had that onion powder that was in my salad in the restaurant or something like that, and you're finding that you're turning down social events because you don't want to eat with people, etc., then make someone else accountable for your food diary. So if you're a child, it could be a parent, or if you're an adult, maybe a partner. maybe someone at work, maybe even just a computer program if you don't have anyone. But it means that in the end of the day or week, you can go to this person and say, yeah, I feel good today. Yeah, no reactions. Excellent, tick. And they're keeping account of what you've eaten. Or I feel rubbish today. My energy's really low. I'm really low mood. What was that? Oh, I drank last night. Okay, it could be that. Could be something else. And then that person gives me the report and I start working through it. So that's another good way. And it works really well with children as well, because children can become very, they're really worried about their bodies. Suddenly they're having this food they're getting a reaction to, and they can, that can take a while to break that pattern. So that's important too.
That's a really good tip. It's like you're working with somebody else, and that community feeling is really good for you, like really kind of anti-inflammatory in a way. So, I mean, you've given really, really good tips, and I just wanted to clarify to finish. So you're saying that IBD can be symptom-free, so people do have a way out of this.
Yeah, they do, absolutely. And I think the key thing is believing that, which sounds really simple, but it's like you've heard from your GP, your trusted medical professional, the person who ran the endoscopy scan, reports on Google, etc., friends who have got this condition, that it's lifelong, it's chronic inflammatory condition, it's not acute, you will have to be on medication for life. And I've worked with some clients now that are still on medication and want to stay on it for life, and I fully support that. Any decisions around coming off medication is not for me to say, that's with the GP or the medical professional. But likewise, I have got clients that come off medication with their GP's approval. And they're great because they make very careful food choices. They know they have to have certain nutrients each day. Maybe they've done something like the elemental diet short term, which has really, supported a reduction in inflammation. They get a calprotectin test every 3 to 6 months, and they see that their levels are, down. And if there was, say, a traumatic event in the family, a death of a partner or change in lifestyle circumstances, they've then got the option of going back on medication short term to bring everything back in balance. So again, it's believing you can, working with someone who shares that belief, and making positive steps, and just small changes can get amazing results.
Oh, what a great way to finish. Thank you so much, Karen. I feel like there's so much hope for anybody listening who has IBD. There's so much hope, and there's actually routes that they can take now. It's like, okay, so maybe I should consider a stool test, or maybe I should just do some general lifestyle changes just to kind of, improve my symptoms.
So if someone's listening to this and they've got IBD and they're feeling a bit like they don't know where to start, maybe they've got financial restrictions on testing and who they can work with. If they just pick up one thing, like I'm going to add olive oil once a day, extra virgin olive oil, that's going to create positive changes. Then next week, add in a walk before midday. The week after, maybe have a green tea instead of a coffee. And it's just these small 1% changes add up to a lot. So yeah, never too late. And, there's always something you can do with your health.
Amazing. So Karen, how can people find you after this conversation?
Yeah, so although I'm UK based, I do work with clients in the States, Australia and Europe. So you can reach out to me via my website. It's www.kps-nutrition.co.uk. I'm on Instagram at Karen_Preece Smith, and just drop me a DM. I love chatting to people. I share lots of free content. So, you can listen to other podcasts as well that I'm on, and, find that my hope is always that someone gets something out of every time I speak. So, I'm happy to give away my knowledge for free. It's about the personalization of that knowledge to you, which gets the real results.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Karen. That was lovely.
Thank you.